Hello, welcome to Ray-ality TV. I'm Raymond Bakari. Today I'm joined by Providence Ward 2 City Councilwoman Helen Anthony. The ward contains the Blackstone, College Hill, and Wayland neighborhoods of the city. Councilwoman Anthony, how are you today?
I'm great, and thank you so much for asking me to join you.
It's good to have you on. Starting off with my first question here, you're approaching the end of your first term on the City Council. We have an election year coming up. All 15 wards are up for election. Are you planning on running for re-election for another term in Ward 2?
I am.
And the City Council elections are predominantly knocking on doors and listening to constituents, as well as sending mailers. What are some of the specific issues you're hearing from your constituents that they want you to focus on?
Well, I mean, I think it's the same issues, always the same issues. So city finances, my constituents, and I think many constituents across the city, the residents are very concerned about the fiscal health of our city, especially with an unfunded pension liability the size of ours, which is $1.265 billion. We're only 26% funded. And we've been that way for a while, and it's not getting any better. I will say that I think our mayor has done a very good job of preparing and the operating budget, and we've been really good with our operating budget since he's been in office, and even probably before then. But with an unfunded pension liability that can't be sustained, it's a real issue. And I'll have to say education is always the top issue. You know, the quality of the public education here. I think we can all agree that it hasn't been what it should be. It's not what it should be. And as you know, we've lost control. The city has lost control. The state is now running the school system. That's difficult for us because I think there's not enough transparency in terms of the progress, if there is any, that's being made. And also affordable housing is definitely high on the list because we just don't have enough of it.
Looking at the issue of education, particularly with the state takeover of the Providence Public School District, I know you were against the state takeover, even testifying against it. Looking at the state takeover 2 years later, do you think it's been a success or a failure so far?
Well, I would say it's very hard to tell. I think one of the things that we were promised by the commissioner is that there would be transparency and more communication with the community, with parents, with city council, with others who are genuinely interested in what's going on. And I can say that I think there's been very little transparency. So it's very hard for me to make any judgment on exactly what's going on because we have nothing really to review.
When the need for a state takeover came to be, you've seen that there's now increasing for educational reforms to be done. There's a list of solutions that have been brought up by people on both sides of the discussion. You hear needs to be more funding to repair the buildings. And then on the other side, you hear calls for charter school expansions and even school choice in some cases. Where do you stand on the calls for things like expansion and charter schools in the city?
Well, I am a big proponent of the public school system. I'm worried, you know, I understand that people want the option of having the charter schools because of the quality of the public education. So it's hard to have a rigid line in the sand, but my fundamental belief is that the money that we have should be spent appropriately and effectively to improve our public education. So I would say that, you know, I am not in favor of the expansion of charter schools.
Do you see there at least being room for some charter schools in the city?
I think there might be some room. We do have some successes. You know, I just think we really have to look at the funding formula. We have to look at the resources. You know, I'm still open to listening to the argument since I'm not in any seat to make a decision at this point. I'm open to learn more about it, but fundamentally, I've always felt that the money should be used for the public schools.
Redistricting is coming up for the ward boundaries and reviewing the city's charter. For those watching, this happens every 10 years. One idea that you're in favor of specifically and are proposing is adding at-large council seats, which to my understanding would be seats that represent the whole city and would replace some of the wards that we have. Can you explain a little more about that proposal for those watching and why you think it's needed?
Well, sure. I'm still, you know, thinking about numbers, and I certainly haven't put anything forth solidly yet, but I think when you look at a governance structure, and I can say this now having almost completed my first term, 15 individual wards for a city that's only the size of 191,000 people is just unwieldy. And so, you have, even though, I know everybody's concerned about the city as a whole, but really your first concern is always about satisfying the residents that elect you in your wards. So, my thought is, reduce the number of wards. I'm not talking about adding at-large seats on top of what we have, because then it really becomes unwieldy. But I'd be interested in pursuing some thought as to reducing the number of wards and then adding, council people at large, so that you have people that are answering to the community as a whole, in addition to, fewer ward seats.
It sounds similar to what Cranston does. I know Cranston has 3 at-large city council seats. So if this were to be the new norm, would it be, I've heard that it would be 3 at-large. So would it be like wards 1 through 12 and then 3 at-large seats?
I would recommend, if I were to do it, and I'm still thinking about it, so I don't want to be saying this is a definitive for me, but I think 15 is too many. 15 seats on council is too many for a city this size. I had some experience. I was also on the city council in Columbia, Missouri, where we had 6 seats and a mayor who sat on the council. And so you had 7. And I'm just saying, having that kind of experience, it was a city of approximately 113,000, a university town. You can get a lot more done, I have to say, when you have fewer, you can, there was a lot of crossing of lines. We had Republicans and Democrats out there, and there was a lot of differing opinions, but you were really able to get a lot done because you weren't, discussing it amongst 15 different people. So I've seen the benefits of a smaller council, and I'm thinking that we might benefit from a smaller council here.
Another proposal that's been talked about for this charter review and possible amendments to the charter is to have an elected school committee. Currently, they're appointed by the mayor, to my understanding. Do you support or oppose the idea of an elected school committee for Providence?
I very much like the idea of an elected school committee. I think that, who better than the parents of the children who are attending the school and the residents of Providence to decide who it is that's going to have their voice on the board. I also came from Columbia, Missouri, not originally, but when I served out there, they were elected. They had to run, they had to do door to door. They had to make sure that they were representing the interest of the people that elected them. And I just think that it's the way it should go, having elected school board members.
Public safety is in the city is also up there on top issues heading into 2022. There are quite a few subtopics when it comes to this issue, but starting off with the main one, which is the issue of defunding the police. To some residents, when they hear things like reimagine how public safety is done, they see that as taking police budget money and then putting it to other areas like social workers responding to mental health and addiction crises, for example, thus defunding. Where do you stand on that issue?
Well, I have also, I have supported our police. I supported the contract, the new contract. I understand the value of having police on the street. Community policing, I think, is a good idea. I have a great deal of faith in our Colonel, Colonel Hugh Clements, who is heading our police department. With that said, I think there's always room to improve. And so one of the things that I was very interested in, and still am because it's still moving forward, is a diversion program. And that would be where, the calls all come into a 911, then they would be separated into criminal, non-criminal, or, where you need police on the scene, but you need social workers, healthcare workers, people that can be diverted to the scene, aren't wearing police uniforms, that can address some of the issues that the police just aren't trained to handle. And so I'm still very in favor of that idea. I think there's certain things that we can do, and I want to make sure also that our police are being trained. Anti-violence, anti-escalation. I'm a great believer in that. They need to be trained in constitutional rights, things like that, so that they can be more educated in their approaches to policing this community.
It certainly is a common idea that I hear amongst council candidates and even mayoral candidates. And one follow-up I usually like to ask when talking about this topic, because you had mentioned the social workers responding to like a mental health or addiction crises, for example, would that, if that program is funded, would that money come from the police budget or is it coming from another area?
That is something that I think, originally when I honestly had approached this problem and was thinking this problem through, I thought it could be coming from the police department. I'm not so sure that all of it should come from the police department. I think there's a lot of room in that kind of budget to find some money to be allocated for purposes like that. I can't say for sure that I would take all the money for a program like that out of the police budget, but I think there's always some room in there.
The issue of the city's pension system is also concerning residents, since it could lead to a potential bankruptcy in the city if it continues to get worse, and maybe even receivership. There are a number of solutions being offered that take different approaches. Mayor Lorza recently proposed another bond proposal for $500 million this time, as opposed to the $700 million. There's even calls by some to move to individual 401ks for new hires, or other ideas like getting more revenue, et cetera. What would be your solution to addressing the issue of the city's pension system?
Well, I just served on the pension working group that just put out that report. I'm going to say that going into that work, I was quite concerned. I was not a big proponent of the pension obligation bond at $700 million. That seemed like just too much of a risk for the city. I've also been studying this issue ever since I started. It's really why I ran in Ward 2. Something has to be done. I think our working group did a very good job of coming up with a proposal I support. So the $500 million POB, which is what this would be, a pension obligation bond, would certainly take us out of the 26% funded into more like a 60% funded pension system. I think it's got good guardrails. I think there are certain conditions that must be met before something like this is actually implemented. Also, you're going to need, state legislature approval and also the voter approval. So I'm really, there's not a lot of options for us to get out of this pension mess, is all I have to say. And I think at this point, the 500 million POB is a good start.
Speaking of your time as a council member, earlier you had mentioned that you were a council member in Columbia, Missouri. And I'm kind of curious to know, because I'm not entirely familiar with Missouri politics, what's some key difference when comparing life in Missouri to Rhode Island?
Well, first of all, you have a very robust two-party system out there. Everybody's not a Democrat. I know there's shades of Democrats here, and I'm learning that. Although I'm a Connecticut native, so I'm not, I'm originally a New Englander, but so there's more partisan politics going on, in my opinion, in Missouri. However, with that said, I found that, you can always come to an agreement over things like infrastructure, things that are really the nuts and bolts of the running of a city. I think that you can, really come to some agreement on that. My big thing out there, and the big difference, I think, is the lack of planning. So there was no plan as to how to develop a city. Now think about the fact you've got in Missouri wide open land. It's true, you're not congested like you are in the New England, the Northeast corridor. We, in New England, we plan, and we're lucky to have good planners here in Providence, people with vision as to how the city should grow. Out in Columbia, it was strip mall after strip mall. It was just a crazy no holds barred sprawl. And to me, that was it's so unfortunate. I really was working on trying to get a comprehensive plan for the growth of the city, because there can't be anything more important than that for the functioning and health of a city.
Was there anything in specific that made you want to move to Rhode Island?
Well, my family's in Connecticut. So it's coming home for me. I've got, family in Massachusetts. My mom just passed, but my parents are still living in my hometown in Connecticut. And so, yeah, I happened to marry a Kansas City native. So we were out there for 10 years to be close to his family, but I was thrilled to be back.
It's certainly an amazing state, and I'm glad you were able to provide insight about Missouri, because I only know from a national outside of Missouri sense. Like, I know who their senators are and their governor to an extent, but I personally wouldn't know like from a local issue, and that's awesome that you were able to provide that insight. My final question is one that I ask everyone here on the show to keep tradition, and it's a non-political one. In your opinion, what do you think Rhode Island is best known for?
Oh, there's no question in my mind. It's the ocean state for a reason. I mean, our coastline is absolutely spectacular. That's something that's just truly, just beautiful. And I do like calamari.
Calamari, can't go wrong with that. I forget who said at the DNC, but it was calamari. It was like a meme on the internet and all that. Councilwoman, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure of mine to have you on.
Great, thank you. Take care.
And thank you for watching this episode of Ray-ality TV. Please click the subscribe button down below on this channel, on the Anchor TV Rick channel, and the post notification bell icon to the right of it. If you want to see the political profile version of this, prior and future, that all can be seen on anchorweb.org. I'm Raymond Bakari, and I'll see you on the next episode.